What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you an update on Cyberpunk 2077. Now, personally, I did not have a soft relaunch of Cyberpunk 2077 in my February bingo card, but nonetheless, here we are. Now, that said, this patch is not being branded as a soft relaunch of the game, but that feels like what it actually is. For starters, this is the next-gen update. You can now get Cyberpunk 2077 on the Xbox Series X and S, as well as the PlayStation 5. Moreover, there's actually a demo of the game available on those platforms, which honestly, probably a smart PR move. Now, before we go too much further, I do want to mention that there is the obvious statement of this is the stuff that pretty much should have been with the game on launch, and I agree with that sentiment. I don't think you'll find much of anybody that wouldn't agree that Cyberpunk 2077 needed more time in the oven, even if you enjoyed it. I honestly thought it was fine, but it definitely needed more dev time. So I'm with you on that sentiment, but nonetheless, we're going to go over what this patch is because this is where we're at now. That said, the actual patch notes will be linked in the description below, and we're going to hit the big highlights, of course. This patch largely feels like it took every major criticism this game received and chose to try to do something about it. First and foremost, you can buy more apartments throughout the city now. You can actually customize your first apartment, V's apartment that you start the game in. If you go to the computer there, you can access a website that will actually let you customize and upgrade your apartment. Doing things in your apartment, such as sleeping or taking a shower, will now offer small buffs that actually make it worthwhile, such as experience gains, health regen, etc. You can also use the mirror in your apartments to actually change your appearance now, because you couldn't change your appearance up to this point after character creation. They also added 2 new weapons, as well as several mods and things to add to existing weapons. There was an overhaul of the combat AI, so this will largely affect how all enemies approach combat, either being more aggressive or perhaps even more tactical. In fact, they even seem to have taken it one step further and applied combat behaviors to factions, meaning that the factions of enemies you come across will all behave in a somewhat similar manner. So some factions might be aggressive, some might be more cautious, etc., which will lead to some variance in how certain enemies attack you. We also saw some changes to crowds. So when you're out walking the city, crowds should look more diverse now. And instead of being like literally the same NPC in some cases, they'll be a little bit more visually diverse, as well as in some cases reacting to what you're doing. Some citizens will actually attack you if you attack them, etc. They improved driving a ton. They made tons of changes to how basically every car in the game handles, including things like motorcycles, etc. They also kind of applied this to the traffic of the game. The traffic going on throughout the city will react to things being done, such as collisions. Passengers in those cars can actually die if such a thing happens, that type of stuff. So traffic is a bit more responsive to the world. Beyond that, we saw a ton of balance changes around V, your actual character. Kind of a lot to cover specifically here, but they actually renamed the stealth tree to ninjutsu altogether because of the significant changes that were made to it. They flat out replaced some of the skills and things that you could upgrade. They rearranged others. There were significant changes made to the skills, so I'd recommend you actually check those out yourself. Now, when it comes to quick hacking, that is to say just hacking objects or other enemies, if you will, through the net running ability, this largely boiled down to bug fixes. There were some bug fixes that caused this to be either way too useful or not useful enough in certain cases. But when it comes to damage over time effects, they actually reduced the significance of the primary damage of those things, so they overall just do less damage, which applies primarily to net running. Net running or hacking people did just a lot of damage over time style stuff. A lot of that has been toned down a bit, and in fact, most of the character redesign stuff in terms of your skills and things were largely aimed at toning down the ridiculous stuff that was way over the top and kind of bringing it in line with something slightly less powerful, albeit you're definitely going to be overpowered towards the end of the game still. They also extended the romances. Now, a couple of the romances actually weren't bad, but some of them were a little light. All of the romances available for the actual side characters saw a bit of an overhaul with extra messages, conversations, etc. So a bit more going on the romance side of things. There were a ton of quest fixes, ranging from everything to the gigs, which is the small little side jobs, all the way up to the actual story quests. These included some of the larger bugs that were still present in the game, as well as adding a sort of reputation to each of the fixers throughout the city. So each neighborhood in the city has its own fixer, and previously you could pretty much unlock the gigs that they would give you right away. Now, however, as you do gigs, you'll increase your reputation, if you will, with that fixer, and once you complete a set of gigs, then you'll be given access to the next set, which makes the progression on those things feel a bit more natural. They also added fixer-specific rewards to all but one of the fixers for completing all of the gigs that they have available for you. And they actually pointed out that one particular fixer will not give you a reward just because he's a dick, which I thought was fun. The single most important change they made to the game was water physics. So now if you crash into the water or shoot the water, the game will actually do something to recognize that. In fact, if you're outside when it's raining, you can even see the raindrops falling and sliding down the side of your windows in your car. But that is all of the major highlights that were included in this patch. Truthfully, there is just a ton of granular stuff that's honestly a lot for a video without making this thing like 30-40 minutes long. There you go, everyone. There is the highlights of the patch 1.5 recently released. Now, going forward in the future, I imagine that CD Projekt's Red focus is probably going to be on DLC from here on. And while I imagine we will still see things like bug fixes, etc. going forward, I sincerely doubt they're interested in spending much more time on this base game stuff, and we haven't heard anything about DLC, so it's about time for that, I imagine, in terms of their workload. So the next major update for this game, I imagine, will very likely be talking about any DLC, and the reception of that DLC, I imagine, is what will largely dictate their path forward from there. But I would almost be willing to bet money on at least one, and again, depending on critical reception of that one DLC, they will probably either choose to continue to make DLC or move on. At least that's how I see it personally. Obviously, I don't work there. I don't know what their plans are. That said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Maybe consider joining the channel as a member if you haven't. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you again. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.